Oh, the collecting a digital.
Just the one?
Yeah, just the one.
Now, when you go in,
Yep.
you won't need this immediately,
Sure.
because the first 20 minutes is guided by a member of staff.
Hello.
Come on in.
Thank you.
Enjoy yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Head on to for me, that's fine.
This room or the next you with the words Harry first heard when entering the castle. Welcome to Hogwarts. Yes, this is of course the Great Hall. This was one of the first sets ever built for the films, and as you can probably tell, it's one of the largest. This stood for just about 10 years in a soundstage over to your left actually. And as you look around, you can see we are currently dressed and ready for the Christmas feast that you saw in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. For this, we have festooned the Great Hall with these incredible Christmas trees, festive garlands, and this scrumptious looking feast. Now these ornaments on the trees, these were designed by the art department. They were then made by the props department and placed onto the trees by the set decorators. And the special effects team led by Tom Richardson also got involved by making these malevolent witches flying around the tops of the trees as well. On the walls we have the garlands that were actually used in the filming, and these have been spruced up with fresh ivy for the tour today. And when looking around, you may also notice that something is missing. The ceiling. Remember, the Great Hall ceiling was enchanted and it would be a bit tricky to fit stars and clouds in here, so those were added magically by computers. Although a ceiling model was made, and you'll see that around the corner in just a moment. Now, whilst the ceiling may not have been real, the floor on the other hand, this most certainly is. This is real York flagstone, similar to what you find in castles up and down the country. We have this here, this was the very first film. The filmmakers realised the leading doors of Burrow there, and these are real stones in Texas to show this. And indeed, it did survive some of the biggest scenes, including the Yule Ball, which you'll be able to see sets and costumes from around the corner in just a moment. Now back to this scrumptious looking piece on these people's head. I'll let you know on your first secret of the day. During filming, the filmmakers on the first film used real food, and that looked and smelled delicious, and I can guarantee the actors probably love that as well. But after a few hours under the hot studio lights, that quickly changed and it no longer looked or smelled quite so delicious. That's when the filmmakers realised they would need to make fake food. So if you have a look over to that side of the room, the dessert table, try and see for yourself if you can tell what food over there is real and what food has been made by the talented props department. Now we also have no Christmas dinner complete without Christmas puddings. And these Christmas puddings over there by my friend Melissa, these are rigged up by the special effects team. So if you get your cameras out and take a little bit of a step backwards because we use real fire, on 1, 2, 3, we are able to set these Christmas puddings alight, just like in the films. And these Christmas puddings are concrete with steel holly on top, and that's how they're able to withstand that heat. But it does mean that if you take a bite, you might get a bit of a shock. Now, if I can draw your attention towards the front of the room, just like Harry, Ron and Hermione would have done on their first day in the castle, you have now walked through the entrance doors, up the centre aisle and up towards the teacher's table, where they were sorted in front of some of Britain's finest acting talents. And one of those acting talents is Robbie Coltrane, who played Ruby as Hagrid, whose costume we have here. Although Robbie Coltrane never actually wore this costume. And that's because although he was a tall man standing at 6'2", he wasn't actually tall enough to play a half giant. And this was worn by his body double, Martin Bayfield, an ex-England rugby player. Martin Bayfield was a massive 6'10", and even then they added stilts to his shoes, padding underneath his clothes, and even fitted an animatronic head that looked and moved like Robbie Coltrane's face. This is still working, and you'll be able to see this face talking away in the Creatures Workshop later on the tour. But for now, as our time in the Great Hall slowly comes to an end, I have a few little tips that will help you on your tour today. First of all, if you've managed to pick up an activity tour passport, keep an eye out for the 7 stamping locations and 16 golden snitches hidden up around the tour. Some are big and some are small. And I'll point the first one out. It's just hanging in the doorway over there. If you don't have one of these passports yet, feel free to grab one at the first stamping location in the Gryffindor Common Room. Now, if you have one of the digital tour guides, your tour also begins just through the archways, where you just need to keep an eye out for the digital tour guide icons. At the halfway point, we also have a cafe where we're selling butterbeer, and you should aim to be here from just after 8 o'clock. If you have any questions about that, feel free to ask a member of staff throughout the tour. And last but not least, thank you all very much for visiting, especially during our Hogwarts in the Snow feature. Your tour now begins just around the corner, where you're free to go behind the scenes.
You're now officially behind the scenes, and it's time for us to go behind the magic. Take a look around. It's a bit hard to believe, but even though the Great Hall you just walked through may have real Yorkstone floors, its walls, which appear centuries old, are nothing more than wood and plaster. And that kind of real-world wizardry takes quite a lot of skill. Of course, it was author J.K. Rowling who gave us the extraordinary world of Harry Potter, but it took teams of people with a variety of talents to bring that world to life on screen. BAFTA and Academy Award-winning production designer Stuart Craig was the visionary behind the look of the films. His team of over 200 artists created thousands of sketches and drawings used to guide the construction of the sets and props. Then, teams of set decorators dressed those sets for filming. Meanwhile, the costume department created over 25,000 costumes, and the hair and makeup team worked each day to transform hundreds of actors into the characters you know and love. The special effects and visual effects teams all worked together to bring the magic of Hogwarts to the screen, and the creature effects department created elves, werewolves, giants, and other magical creatures and fantastic beasts. The list goes on, and in fact, you'll get to hear from every filmmaking department throughout your tour today. In the meantime, have a look around. From Great Hall to Gryffindor Tower, you've arrived at Harry's home at Hogwarts, the Gryffindor Boys' Dormitory. This set was built for the very first film, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Because Hogwarts is so vast, this room was made to be cosy, and over the course of the films, very little changed, including the beds. They were originally built for 11-year-old boys, but those boys grew. By the later films, the actors had to curl up to fit in them. The set would also get very crowded when filming. That's why the walls of this room are movable. This allowed for wider shots and more breathing room for cameras, lighting, microphones, dozens of crew members, and all of the actors. Talking of the actors, the dormitory often reminds the filmmakers of the cast's earliest days on the set, especially a young Daniel Radcliffe. Building all of these sets required quite the crew. The set construction team had about 250 members, from carpenters to painters to metalworkers. They built the smallest sets, like the cupboard under the stairs, to the largest sets, like the Ministry of Magic. Sets were typically built from wood and plaster, but the construction team actually pioneered the practice of using foam as a construction material. Foam is lighter than other materials and can be moulded or carved to look like anything. For 10 years, this crew was constantly building, even during filming. Sound travelled very easily through the thin stage walls, so whenever the cameras were shooting on the main stages, most construction had to stop. Patience, experience, and talent made the Harry Potter construction crew one of the best in the industry. Perhaps second only to the Great Hall set, the Gryffindor Common Room is one of the film's most beloved locations. That's due in large part to all of the room's rich details. Take a look around and see if you can spot a comic book that was created by the graphics team, The Adventures of Martin Miggs the Mad Muggle. The portraits on the walls are all former Gryffindor heads of house. I'm sure you'll recognise Professor McGonagall, patterned after a young Maggie Smith. She's just to the right of the staircase. The set decoration team specifically selected every item in this room to showcase Gryffindor's scarlet and gold colours, and to give the room some age. The Common Room appeared in all but the final 2 films, and didn't change much at all. This was a set in which the cast truly got to grow up, and the film directors got to watch the kids grow as actors too.
I always thought of it as the home that Harry had never had.
That initially was the idea. It was the contrast
Shooting a scene with 150 Hogwarts students requires hiring 300 actors, who in fact are students, because school-age performers are still required to receive an education, even when they're working on a Harry Potter movie. All of the young actors could only work on set for 4 hours each day. The rest of the day was dedicated to education. So when the best schools in the area were set up right here at Leavesden, every actor under the age of 16 spent 3 hours in the classroom. On the busiest days, over 50 tutors would be on hand to teach the students in 2 waves. One group would work in the morning, while another group was in class. At midday, they would switch in a changeover that was often described as a military operation. One army of students made their way from the set to the classrooms, just as another army marched in the opposite direction, from the classrooms to the set. The 4-hour rule applied to the film's young stars as well. According to their teachers, Daniel Radcliffe loved languages, especially English and French. Emma Watson had a knack for geography, and Rupert Grint had a passion for art. Production designer Stuart Craig has said that Dumbledore's office is his favourite set. It's also one of the older sets, created initially for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. On the shelves surrounding you are some of the prop team's favourite creations, hundreds of scientific instruments, all designed, built and aged from scratch. Above the shelves, you'll find the Sword of Gryffindor. This sword was purchased at auction, but the handle was redesigned and modified by the props team. All around Dumbledore's office, you'll see hundreds of books, and the sorting hat hiding up there too. Believe it or not, most of those books are actually old phone books covered in leather and dust. You'll also notice two versions of Dumbledore's costume. Dumbledore was the only major character to be played by two different actors during the film series. In the first two films, actor Richard Harris wore medieval Renaissance attire. For the rest of the series, costume designer Johnny Timim gave actor Michael Gambon a lighter, more colourful look, a style she called hippie chic. Before you leave, make sure you look for Dumbledore's telescope on the upper level of the office. This is one of the most detailed pieces made during production. It has golden interlocking rings, and it's engraved with the signs of the zodiac.
Form that petrol beam is strong enough to allow you to put the last
Wizards need wands, and the prop team made over 3,000 of them. More than 1,000 were made for the Battle of Hogwarts alone. Each design was made in many different versions. The perfect-looking hero wands, the ones used for close-ups with the actors, were made of wood and resin. Stunt wands were made of rubber, while special effects wands had tiny lights at the end to create a magical lumos glow. To keep track of them, each wand was given a number and inserted into a simple plank of wood. Actors arrived on set and received a number and the matching wand. At the end of the day, the actors returned their numbered wands to the prop team to be sure that none got lost. Rumour has it they never lost a single one, though I did hear Daniel Radcliffe wore out nearly 80 of them by using them as drumsticks on nearly everything between takes. Over the years, the wands went from carved sticks to intricate combinations of wood, metal, and even glass. Props are any objects that an actor touches, and the props team built more than 10,000 items for the Harry Potter films. If you piled all of the props on top of each other in a room, you get something like the Room of Requirement. In fact, that's exactly what you'd get. The room of requirement, seen in the last film, took more than 14 weeks to build, partly because nearly every prop from every film was placed there. Typically, a prop begins as a sketch or drawing. Then, it is the job of the props team to figure out how to make it. For Harry Potter, that could mean carving a broomstick out of wood, or crafting thousands of Hufflepuff cups, or gold-plating a golden snitch. Other props were purchased by the set decorators at auctions or antique shops, and then altered by the props team. And finally, some, like several of Ron's dormitory blankets, were actually homemade. Most props were made in 4 or 5 different versions, often with dozens of copies of each. Stunt props were made of rubber, so they could be tossed around, exploded, or set on fire. The props in perfect shape, with perfect finishes, are called hero props. On set, props were stored in a cage like this one, and everything was catalogued in a massive database, so the prop crew could find any prop in record time. In the case in the centre are some of the prop makers' favourite pieces, and there are thousands of props beyond what you see in this cage.
Inscriptions on the arches and the potions themselves, all these glass jars lining the walls.
If you hadn't guessed from the strange jars and cauldrons, this is the potions classroom. You're seeing the set today as it appeared in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Professor Slughorn taught the class. Before that, when it was Professor Snape's classroom and office, the set was actually half this size. The very first potions class wasn't a set at all. It was shot on location at Laycock Abbey in Wiltshire, England. As the room expanded over the course of the films, designers added all sorts of details. If you look up to the archways of the room, those strange words are actually medieval alchemy ingredients. On the table, you'll see a student potions kit made from an old surgical set found at auction. The cauldrons on the table are just a sample of more than 200 cauldrons used on the films. The one stirring itself magically is a practical effect created by the special effects team. Now have a look at the shelves. Can you believe you're seeing nearly 1,000 vials, bottles and jars? And this is only half of the set. Each has its own handmade label made of real gold leaf and is filled with peculiar ingredients, like real baked bones or rubber lizard tails. See what other odd ingredients you can find in these bottles. One of the set decoration team's first shopping lists called for 200 framed portraits. They've been around since the beginning. What you may not realise is that these portraits are real works of art, not prints on canvas, but actual paintings. The artists were all classically trained painters who used oil paint and acrylics to create their work. Once the paintings were complete, the props team aged them a few hundred years. Each was covered in varnish and wax, so that when it dried, it cracked and popped, just like a painted canvas would after a number of years. Many of the portraits were inspired by real masterpieces found in the National Portrait Gallery. But often, the directors, producers, and crew members stepped in as models. The key on the wall will show you exactly who's who. The bright green portraits are another story. These were used to create the paintings with moving imagery. A dedicated production crew filmed the scenes that were then added by the visual effects department. This wall has just a small selection of over 350 paintings. The human members of the birds and animal crew numbered at about a dozen, and they cared for all of the more than 250 animals featured on camera. Living, breathing and eating animals who managed to devour over 65,000 kilos of food. There were owls, of course, more than 60 breeds in all, but also dogs, cats, hippos, toads, horses, zebras, a bush baby, and even centipedes. Dogs and cats picked up tricks rather quickly. The owls, on the other hand, they were not so wise. They took up to 6 months each to learn something as simple as how to carry a letter. You're standing in front of the larger of 2 versions of Hagrid's hut built for the films. This one was used to make characters visiting Hagrid look smaller than they actually were. That's why you'll see giant chairs and tables in here. The filmmakers also created a scaled-down version, so that actor Robbie Coltrane, who played Hagrid, would look like a half-giant. Props were made the same way. Small props made Hagrid look large. Larger props made Harry, Ron and Hermione look small. The hut appeared in all but the last 2 films. It was first shot on location in Black Park, then moved back to Leavesden. For Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, the hut made a legendary journey to the Highlands of Scotland. First, it was transported from here to Scotland by truck, and then flown to its hillside location on a helicopter. Meanwhile, several teams of trail guides led the 300-person crew and all their equipment up a muddy hillside in never-ending rain. It was quite the epic journey, but the filmmakers ended up with one of the most picturesque shots of the series. Every broomstick flight and expecto patronum blast came from the effects teams. Together, they made wizarding magic a reality on screen. Very simply, special effects are tricks that happen in front of the camera, while visual effects are digital enhancements added with computers after the film has been shot. For the Harry Potter films, the 2 departments had to work together in lockstep. The moving Quidditch broomstick on your right is a special effect, while the creation and seamless integration of the moving backdrops of a stormy Quidditch pitch are visual effects. All of the specialised physical objects that the actors interacted with, like the Gringotts cart here, the motion-controlled Anglia and broomstick, and Moody's trunk, were created by the special effects team. Even the Chamber of Secrets snake door, which many people assume was digital, was actually a working practical effect. After shooting the actors on a green screen stage, like the one before you, visual effects artists would enhance the scenes with digital backgrounds and other effects, like Dementors and wand blasts. More than 8,000 visual effects shots were created for the films, from the very grand, a crowded Quidditch World Cup stadium, to the extremely tiny, removing spots from the faces of the teenage cast. With their perfect combination of digital artistry matched with real-world skill, these 2 departments made magic look real. quaint and charming explosion of orange is the Burrow. The Weasley family didn't have much money to spend on fancy things, so set decorators spent half a year scouring second-hand shops and auctions, or hand-making all of the props used to dress this set. On the left, you'll see the Weasley Clock. The props team added all sorts of spinning, swinging bits and bobs to an old grandfather clock, replacing the hands with scissors and putting photos of the family members on the handles. In just 2 weeks, the clock went from auction antique to a one-of-a-kind Weasley heirloom. The special effects team left their mark at the Burrow too. Every magical gadget you see is the authentic mechanical device that operated live on camera. Step up to any of the 4 podiums and have a go. Wave your hand to activate the knitting needles, iron, chopping knife, or self-washing frying pan. Towards the end of the film series, Malfoy Manor served as the headquarters for the Death Eaters, led by the evil Lord Voldemort. The house, where Draco Malfoy grew up, was designed after an Elizabethan country home, a dramatic contrast to Harry's cramped cupboard under the stairs and the Dursley house in Little Whinging. This room was the setting for Death Eater meetings, including the one at which Charity Burbage met her grisly fate. The creature effects team created the silicone dummy here for background shots of Miss Burbage. You'll see the manor fireplace with the Malfoy family crest inside, which was designed to cast dramatic shadows through the room. On either side, you'll see 2 portraits modelled after members of the art department. 6 others were painted featuring members of the costume and props departments. Have a look at the costumes. On the right end of the table, you'll see Voldemort's Slytherin green robes that are unlike any other wizards. His are made of lightweight habitized silk to give them an almost ghostly, ethereal quality. Actor Ralph Fiennes said the robes made him feel like he had a second layer of reptile skin. When the actors first set foot on the Ministry set, No one could believe how big it was. This section here is just a small bit of it. The whole set stretched from the office towers in front of you all the way to the green screen stage behind you. At more than 35 feet tall, it was simply enormous and quickly became the favourite set of Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson. On the right, you'll see the ministry fireplaces that served as portals to the Floo network, which was how many wizards arrived to work. We only have 2 of these magical fireplaces here, but there were more than a dozen fireplaces on the original set. The offices comprised just 2 of the 4 gigantic towers from the ministry. Each was fully dressed with desks, chairs and cabinets, all made out of cardboard since the upper floors of the ministry were not built to support any real weight. Hogwarts and much of the wizarding world are filled with towering stone statues, grand golden fountains, and other carved masterpieces of every sort. These had to be sculpted by hand, and there was a department for that too. The sculptors created the original Ministry of Magic statues, the flying boars atop the Hogwarts gates, the life-size wizard chess pieces, and the Riddle family grave. You'll see even more of their masterpieces as our tour continues. Typically, all of the sculptures followed this basic process. First, the crew sculpted their piece out of clay or styrofoam. A negative mould of the sculpture was created, and then a final cast was created, typically in fiberglass, which was then painted to look like stone, marble, bronze, or whatever finish was required.
Stay low, bring your left side across, your left arm to protect your center. Keep your eye on the target at all times. Now,
First years, please note that the Dark Forest is strictly forbidden to all students. In spite of Dumbledore's warning, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and other Hogwarts students would find themselves roaming the dark woods throughout the motion picture series. The Forbidden Forest was one of J.K. Rowling's favourite settings, one filled with danger and magical creatures. The filmmakers regarded it as a character all of its own, and one that grew ever more menacing with each subsequent visit. The first forest scenes were shot on location, but it soon became clear that constructing the set would give the filmmakers greater flexibility for production. This also resulted in the construction of some of the largest and most complex sets in the entire film series, requiring the talents of over 300 crew members. In his scenes with Aragog the Acromantula, Ron Weasley's frightened expressions were particularly realistic. That's down to the fact that actor Rupert Grint has arachnophobia in real life and is terrified of even the smallest spiders. There is a lot to discover in the Forbidden Forest, including other magical and fearsome creatures. And fair warning, as you explore, it would be wise to stay on the path.
Yeah, but we can't come back to it.
That's awesome.
I'm gonna definitely get one.
On a Hogwarts play. I'm gonna do it. That's gonna be my half of
I'm going to Harry Potter. This is the frog.
With a deep breath and a courageous dash toward the wall between platforms 9 and 10, Harry arrived on platform 9 3/4 and got his first glimpse of the Hogwarts Express. In reality, this mighty locomotive is known as the Alton Hall 5972. The steam engine dates back to 1937, and for 26 years it travelled all around Great Britain. In 1967, it was retired and sold for scrap. The Alton Hall sat and rusted for nearly 3 decades until it was sold to a private company. Then, in 2000, with a fresh coat of crimson paint and brand new nameplates, the Alton Hall finally became the Hogwarts Express. In the films, the engine pulls 4 British Mark I train carriages, 2 of which you can see behind the engine now. Altogether, these weighed over 78 tons. The carriages date back to the 1950s, just before steam trains went out of service. Because wizards don't need modern technology, production designer Stuart Craig wanted to anchor the films in this era. The train you see here was only used for exterior shots. At the far end of the platform, on the opposite side of the Hogwarts Express, are the Scenic Interiors, which were shot on a soundstage in front of a green screen. To mimic the movement of the train, this entire car was built on a special effects mechanism. It wasn't just broomsticks and portkeys that carried wizards across the world. Sometimes wizards looked for more traditional modes of transportation, with a magical touch. Every car, motorbike and bus used on the set is known as a picture vehicle. During filming, these picture vehicles travelled quite a bit, but none as much as the night bus. The bus itself was built from 3 vintage double-deckers, all cobbled together to create a triple-decker masterpiece. It weighed so much that an extra 4 tons had to be put in the bottom so that it wouldn't topple over. Thankfully, it never did. For 8 nights over 8 weeks, London streets were shut down so the film crew could manoeuvre the night bus through the city streets. Because the bus is 22 feet tall, and London bridges are often only 14 feet tall, the filmmakers mapped out a special course so the bus and the bridges wouldn't get smashed. Around the backlot, you'll see Hagrid's motorbike and the Weasleys' Ford Anglia. When you find them, make sure you hop in, have a seat and take a photo. Just like the night bus, each of these vehicles had loads of on-location adventures. This is where Harry's story all began. Number 4, Privet Drive, home of the dreadful Dursleys. For the first film, Privet Drive was shot on location. This set was built on the backlot for Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. You'll only see 2 homes here, but the full set consisted of 5 houses on either side of the road. The rest of the neighbourhood was built using visual effects. Number 4 was the only home built with interior rooms. All of the others were just facades. That means only the front of the house is finished. However, because these sets were exterior sets, the set construction team built them to be very strong. Over the years, they survived 100-mile-per-hour winds and dozens upon dozens of owls. The set decorators had a lot of fun dressing the interior, especially poking fun at Dudley Dursley. They designed a wall full of outrageous awards he had won, like a primary school certificate for always eating his lunch. Welcome to the Creature Effects Department. Here, creature effects designer Nick Dudman and actor Warwick Davis, who performed as Griphook the Goblin, among other roles, will show you some highlights from the department's collection. During production, you might have found the creature effects crew sculpting a mermaid, tinkering inside a giant animatronic head, or creating prosthetics for dozens of goblins. Imagine this room filled with 140 makeup artists, speaking 17 different languages, turning 60 actors into 60 goblins. And they did it in just 4 hours. On the other side of the room, you'll see a number of lifelike dummies used for character deaths, petrifications, and stunning spells. Each of these was made through a process called life casting. First, a mold was made of a cast member's entire body. Then, a silicone dummy was created. Finally, skin was painted on, hair was inserted by hand, clothing was added, and the perfect replica was complete. In total, more than 250 dummies were made, including many for special effects. For example, the Dumbledore dummy on the left was created at a smaller scale, so actor Robbie Coltrane could look Hagrid-sized when he carried it. The Hermione dummy was built with mechanics inside that allowed it to blow bubbles for the underwater sequence of the Triwizard Tournament. The creature effects team also worked quite often with the visual effects department. The Dementors, House Elves, and Thestrals in this space were all sculpted and cast as three-dimensional maquettes by the creature effects team. The maquettes were then scanned, animated, and brought to life on screen by visual effects artists. To get authentic reactions from the performers, the creature effects team often built life-size mechanical beasts, like the basilisk, giant spiders, and the hippogriff, as you'll soon see.
As part of the prosthetic makeup team that creates the goblins start Harry Potter. Today I'd like to explain how we make the goblins. When you're creating a prosthetic makeup, it needs to move with their skin, their muscle movements. It's really important that you have their life cast, a bit of them to sculpt off. The life casting process begins with mixing up silicone and applying it to the face. We remove that from the actor, and that gets filled with plaster, which then creates plaster bust. And then from this stage on, we start the sculpting process. So here, we have the character Gryffindor. You see this stuff here, it's called plastiline. So we chop it up and we soften it by putting it into a hot pot. Mum was going to love that. You put on lots and lots of clay, fill it all up, and then you get the sculpting tools. And basically you have a bit of fun with it. So you create all your lines. Once you're happy with your final sculpture, this gets divided up into 4 parts. Then we're ready for the next part of it. So you might think we're finished, but the process hasn't stopped there. You can't create a realistic looking makeup by putting on a complete mask. It has to be divided up into 4 sections. When it's divided up into 4 sections, they move with the skin, they move with the muscle movements. So if you see an actor who's sad or he's happy, the prosthetic moves in a realistic way. So I'm going to show you what a prosthetic makeup looks like put together. Here's the chin piece. Stick it onto his chin here like that. Here's the forehead piece. Looks a bit weird on here because it's not on an actor, but it kind of gives you the idea. So these are just one colour. What we need to do is we need to bring them alive by painting them. So that happens over here. To paint a goblin mask takes about 3 to 4 days, depending on veins, moles, freckles, warts, and then that falls into the creases. You get a realistic looking skin. Making our goblins right now, we're actually missing something. And some eyebrows. So come on to the next section. So, this is the final process for the
Hold on a minute, I need to move. Come on.
You are now standing on the set of Gringotts Wizarding Bank. Near the entrance of the hall, you'll see a costume display representing the 4 characters from the iconic break-in scene in the final film. Although Gringotts was among the very first Wizarding World locations that Harry would visit in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, the Gringotts interior set was only first constructed on site at Leavesden nearly a decade later for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. The Gringotts Banking Hall's brief on-screen appearance at Philosopher's Stone had been shot on location in the historic Australia House in London. But when Harry returned to Gringotts in Deathly Hallows, the production team required a more flexible set that they could rig and rearrange however they desired, and ultimately destroy with a dragon. Production designer Stuart Craig used the opportunity to make a few subtle design changes, such as to the pattern of flooring or the addition of windows, while still capturing the grandiose scale and beaux arts details that audiences will remember from Philosopher's Stone. However, not everything you see around you was made exclusively for the final film. Many of the original props, including the banker's scales and desks, were brought out of storage after 10 years, with only minor touch-ups needed before they were ready for the screen once again. You can learn more about how the props and architecture of this set were created in the next room. Before you do, take the time to discover the many fine details of the Gringotts set and immerse yourself in the sensation of being in the middle of a film production. Try to imagine the excitement that would echo through this hall as the Goblins had their final costume fittings, the actors prepared for their takes, and the cinematographer, Eduardo Serra, framed up the perfect shot, all before a quiet hush would fall over the set and director David Yates could call action.
In this marble, we have 2 cups, and then we use detergent just to break the aluminium, which looks like we've got 3 cups going from marble. And then each piece of paper is then individually dipped and then hung to dry. And hopefully everything will be good. You then take the notes of the set and then put that into the pot with new paper. Because the panel is so big, the paper is only quite big in width. We'll have to put them together. And the only method is really get that to work, pull the tail of paper and overlap it. If you look at the marble paper, it creates a pattern, so we use that pattern to back tear, and we can overlap it, so we can go all the way around the top, so it looks as if it's one. He will then go in and do a bit of over-marbling by hand with a little fish brush, and then do his own marble effect to break up the pan a little bit better. We then start to apply some.
As you enter the Lestrange Vault, notice how the atmosphere compares to the brightly lit marbled interior of Gringotts Bank. While the banking hall interior evokes the grandeur and elegance of older London banks, the underbelly of Gringotts, where the vaults are, is much darker and more ominous. Production designer Stuart Craig designed the vaults to look like they were carved by the Goblins themselves out of the existing underground rock. Tool marks were added onto the surface of the rock to further enhance the effect that these vaults were hand-hewn, similar to the ancient tombs of Petra Jordan. In the film, the primary light source within the Lestrange Vault comes from the use of the Lumos spell.
Things peel off one another and multiply.
Hello, sir. Would you like to hold a bar of gold?
Go on then.
Now, I'm warning you, they're very heavy, so you have to be careful. Are you strong enough? Are you strong enough, gents? Are you sure? You've had your Weetabix. How many did you have?
3.
Only 3? I'm not sure you're going to be strong enough. Okay. Okay, just be prepared, okay?
To get the platforms to work that JR was going to put underneath, or the element of the gold increasing.
Oh, it's really heavy.
They're cool, aren't they? They are very cool. But please don't run off with them, otherwise I lose my job.
Not everything in here, but everything here is made of plastic.
No, the gold bars are made of plastic.
Then
But
we covered
the
those
goblets
areas with the net
and
and
the
tied
gold
onto the net the treasure.
is
Then
made of
we put
rubber.
on top of that
The
loose
reason
treasure.
being
So
it's
as
more
we
durable,
saw Harry trying to get
easy to
the
manipulate,
carpet back
doesn't
of the
hurt
set,
anybody,
we could make
and they
the
can make more of
treasure
it.
appear
Yeah.
to grow throughout
And
the
it's
scene.
So they managed to paint it and make it look really bright and really vibrant. It's very clever. They made about 700,000 of these.
Wow.
Yeah. But it's the detail that you see on them.
Yes.
999% gold, carat gold. So it's very clever. Very clever. Would you like to hold a bar of gold?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Hold one. They're very heavy.
Although the majority of the wand effects seen in the film were created using computer-generated imagery, the complex interplay of light and shadow on the surrounding set would be too difficult to achieve in post-production, and thus, Lumos was achieved as a physical special effect on set. During the early films, the wands had to be outfitted with battery packs, roughly the size of a car battery, which caused a bit of discomfort for the actors as they had to carry the batteries around in the scene, often hidden beneath their clothing. As the films progressed, so did technology. By the time they were filming inside the Lestrange Vault for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, the design team could mount 12 to 15 tiny LED lights inside a Perspex ball onto the ends of the wands to light the scene. The most challenging effect to achieve, in order to bring the Lestrange Vault scene to life, was the appearance of rapidly multiplying treasure filling the room. In order to achieve this effect, the whole set was built 9 feet off the ground to accommodate a series of scissor lifts, which were installed underneath to assist in making the treasure rise. You can conduct your own screen test buried in treasure in one of the photo op stations to the right.
Oh, it's so cute.
Digon Alley was Harry's very first glimpse of the wizarding world, and today you're seeing it painted, dressed and lit exactly as it was during production. Originally, Digon Alley was set to be filmed on location, and the filmmakers began scouting for the perfect street. The stories of Charles Dickens were their inspiration, but inevitably Stuart Craig decided to build a more whimsical set. To give the set that magical twist, the crew tugged on walls with ropes, knocked out supports with sledgehammers, and bent doors and windows, which gave the entire street a gravity-defying lean. Up the alley, you'll see Ollivanders on the left. At one time, these windows and shelves were overflowing with more than 17,000 wand boxes. That is, before the special effects teams torched them in the 6th film. Down the street is Flourish and Blots, Diagon Alley's premier bookshop. Each one of the books here, and there are hundreds of them, was created by the graphics department with their own unique title and author. On the other side of the street, you'll find Ilop's Owl Emporium. During filming, the animals team brought in live owls, large, small, brown, grey and white, one for each of these cages. Meanwhile, the art department spent 6 months creating over 20,000 products for the Weasley's Wizard Wheezes shop. See if you can spot the fried egg tree, the Umbridge unicycle, the puking pastille dispenser, or any of the 600 gummy eyeballs made for the shop. Now's your chance to explore Diagon Alley. Peek into the shops and see what you can find. every creature, location, and magical artifact that author J.K. Rowling described in the books began its life on screen in the mind of a concept artist. Their artwork guided the construction crews, costumers, prop makers, digital artists, and others as they created Harry's film world. In this gallery, we've featured 5 of the key artists whose work was seen throughout the film series. Paul Catling was the film series dragon expert. Easily his most complicated piece was the Hungarian horntail Harry battled during the Triwizard Tournament. He drew over 100 horntails before one was finally chosen. Andrew Williamson is an architectural artist that began his film career on Harry Potter. He used his architectural background to create some of the film's most iconic structures and key shots. The grandiose Ministry of Magic atrium, as well as Hogwarts Castle, in both its splendour and devastation. Dermot Power designed many of the film's creatures, particularly the larger ones, like Aragog and Buckbeak, as well as the violent Whomping Willow. There is a near-final version of Buckbeak displayed here, but earlier concepts gave him 6 limbs and a much wiser, more regal demeanour. Adam Brockbank tended to design the friendlier, warmer characters like Fawkes the Phoenix. Adam's warm characters contrasted with the work of Rob Bliss, who specialised on the darker creatures, in Fairy, Dementors and Thestrals, for example. However, Rob had his softer side too, as you can see with Dobby, who took 3 months to develop. Dobby's ears were actually inspired by Max, an art department dog who often curled up under Rob's desk.
My camera.
This spectacular model was built back in 2000 for the very first film and featured in nearly every shot of the castle from the first 6 films. It took 7 months and a team of 40 to build it from scratch. The detail is exceptional. The smallest items were painstakingly made in miniature, like tiny owls, small door hinges, and even a little weather vane. The entire model is wired with more than 300 fibre optic lights and flickering torches. As the books were released and new areas of the castle were revealed, the model was remodelled. Each film required a 3 to 4 month renovation as new structures were added. The iconic bridge was built for Prisoner of Azkaban, the owlry for Goblet of Fire, and the astronomy tower was added for Half-Blood Prince. For the final film, the model was scanned into a computer. This gave the director David Yates and the visual effects team the ability to destroy the castle with fire, magic, and an army of giants without harming the model.
Emma Watson is over here. Emma Watson. Then Grim is over here. Aaron back there. Grim Jones over here. And
Thank you for joining us today. Before we end our tour, I wanted to share something special with you. The Potter crew spent 10 years here at Leavesden, and after the last shot on the last day of filming, no one wanted to say cut. For their final goodbye, the cast watched a video made by First Assistant Director Jamie Christopher. And remember, Hogwarts will always be here to welcome you home.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the Harry Potter studio tour in London. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I know it's been quite a long video today. If you're new to my channel, please remember to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And until the next time, thank you and good night. And I've got no clue where I parked my car. It's around here somewhere, I'm sure of it.